Tom Teague right now. Tom, my friend, down in my stomping grounds. How you doing down there?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All good. So President Trump is saying China is really hard to deal with. What say you on what's happening with the tariffs, you think?
Well, I mean, as usual, China's not playing ball. I think during Trump's first administration, it took them about 3 years to get China to the table, and then suddenly COVID came out. So
Yeah.
China has always proven tricky to deal with, and they have a very different value system than we do in terms of, especially the communists, in
Hmm.
terms of you know, coming to the table and making deals and sticking to deals. So I think this time it's like you mentioned before, the rare earth stuff. And I also think that it's not helpful that they tried to smuggle in this agent into the U.S. This what was it? It was
Some kind of
some
fungus,
biological,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
fungus, which,
Yeah.
you know, it makes you wonder about all the. I mean, this is very conspiratory, I know, but if that's a word, but I think if you look at China, they're obviously aware of our debt situation. They're
Yes.
obviously aware of our sensitivity to inflation. In my opinion, China orchestrated. They opened 15 months later than we did after COVID, and that's absurd. They knew exactly what it was, and they have no
Yes.
regard for human life. So their zero tolerance policy was only to gum up supply chains, and that caused 8% inflation in this country, and it's all but wrecked this economy and the bond market. So I wonder if these agents they're bringing over, or if some of these like industrial espionage looking things that they did with, for example, with chickens and
Hmm.
viruses, or
Hmm.
burning facilities that were grain facilities or meat packing plants. And they bought a lot of meat packing plants, and they control that. I think they control Smithfields.
Yep.
Um, you know, I wonder if all this is sort of on purpose to try and hurt this country. So I think, like, you know, there's a much bigger picture than just the tariffs with Trump. And I think everyone should ask themselves, there's a lot of people who claim to be these free market people, but do you really want to be buying your strategic stuff from a country that's doing this to us?
Yeah.
I mean,
No
these people
kidding.
that brought this agent in were ostensibly connected to the CCP. So,
Yeah.
like, are you kidding me? Like, you know, I just don't know how naive you could be on the whole thing. But I mean, it's definitely hurting China, the tariffs. They're definitely nervous about it. Um, I think this administration's standing up to them. I think on a military basis, we're starting to understand what a threat they are. Their entire military has been built to take on ours,
Yes.
with that is the purpose. And they're vying for, you know, position in the world, and they're not good players. They don't play fair, and you
Sure.
know, we know that. So I think Trump's doing the right thing, and I think, you know, we'll eventually get there. But you know, it's definitely causing some headaches. I mean, so,
So
but
on
I
the zero,
think, yeah,
well,
go ahead.
excuse me, you mentioned the zero tolerance thing. I mean, that hurt their own. I think uh, at least it made a lot of animosity among the population because they literally welded people in their
Absolutely,
homes and
but
yeah,
kind of cemented himself in there, so they
yeah,
don't have any semblance of a democratic system where they have to worry about blowback from stuff like that, and they can push their people a long way, and they can print money, and they can do
mhm,
loans, and you know, all this stuff. And there's a lot of
mhm,
like CCP sycophants out there that think that China's in this like great position right now. They're really not, but
yeah,
you know, they're basically you know, run by an autocrat, and he can do whatever he wants, and they'll just have to get in line, and at some point it's going to erupt. And I think, I'm not an expert on China, but I think at some point, you know, they're going to have to bend the knee, because they're not very far away from that right now.
well, I think we're getting to borrow a phrase, a come to Jesus meeting between the
Yeah,
U.S. and China in some form or another. I mean, they're collapsing, you know, from a Ponzi scheme standpoint. They have infiltrated us. They've forced collapse on our country from the food supplies you mentioned, our technology, you know, Congress with the debt, which is a, I want to talk about that with you. But there are also some big COVID issues going on over there. Again, I read yesterday that a lot of people are really, really sick in China. What is that? I mean,
yeah.
do they have another strain over there or something? I mean, because we don't have that
I've
here,
heard
right?
I've heard about that. Well, I've heard that there's one over there. I you know I I don't trust anything that they're doing,
Exactly.
frankly.
Yeah.
So it worked the first time. I don't think it would work again here.
Hmm.
I don't think there's any way that they could talk Americans into having any sort of lockdown. And I this weekend I was having conversations with people. Our government also benefited big time from COVID because they bailed out all the profligate states like
Yeah.
Illinois, New York, and
Yeah.
California. It went to teachers unions. It went to pensions that were underfunded. It basically bailed these states out. And
After Trump had
I
not
just don't think
bailed
we'll
them
do it
out,
again.
with Trump had
Correct.
not
Correct.
with the SALT, tax deduction and all that stuff, he destroyed all their financing. And that, you're right, that's what that was about, was to refill the coffers.
Well, also we were having this huge migration during COVID from blue states to red states, and
Hmm.
that's slowed down massively. And you can see it with the house builders, the home builders, um, at how much inventory they're carrying right now because people can't afford to sell their houses and move their mortgages and get a new
Yeah.
mortgage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like that was another thing that and that kind of ties in. I've said this before, but I believe that part of the bond market sell off was orchestrated on intentionally to slow that down,
Hmm.
to slow
Well,
that migration down.
Catherine Austin Fitts is, when she interviewed with Tucker, she's talking, which I've interviewed her before, but she was talking about the housing crisis in '08 was intentional to, pull money out of the system somewhere, and it went somewhere. She's talking 21 trillion or whatever. But yeah,
Mm,
all of this I think has been
yeah,
orchestrated. So where are we at on the 10 years? It's right, 4.5 ish.
434.
Okay.
It's rallied today after this ADP number. It was a lot weaker than what was expected. It's not a huge number, but I listen to people all day who trade bonds tell me that it's not going to make a difference if the Fed cuts. And I'll share something with you. I looked
Hmm.
at the off the run Treasury bonds, so everything
Hmm.
from like 10 years out. A lot of the stuff was issued during COVID was issued with coupons of like, and off the run for listeners, it's things that have been issued in the past and are not the
Hmm.
most current issued bonds in
They're
that
not on the
with those
yield curve.
maturities.
Yeah.
Correct.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a decent amount. So I looked at everything that was off the run that I could find, and I came up. There's about $3 trillion of debt that's been issued. If you look at the discounts that that's trading to, because they were issued with much lower coupons, and of course yields are higher now, so prices are down. Um, the face value currently is around 2 trillion. So
Hmm.
there's $1 trillion of face value that's disappeared. So ostensibly, the Treasury could go out and buy these bonds
Yeah.
and get rid of $1 trillion worth of debt. Right? That's not a lot. It's like 3%. Right? But if yields, people who are like panicking that yields could go to 6, 7%, that's going to be even more of a discount, obviously, than where it is today. And
But you'd have
I
to
am,
refinance, right? At current rate.
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
We recommend you take this moment to do what we're about to do, which is enjoy an Alp.
but here's
Yeah.
the interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you get rid of debt, then your debt profile looks better. Your spread should come in on that basis. If that's really
Mm.
what's causing it, I don't necessarily think that is. But it would also make it easier. It would make it more difficult for the Fed to avoid cutting rates, and I think they've
I
been
see.
doing that for a long time. And we had an inflation print last week in the PCE, and it was the lowest in like 5 years. So all of this like doom and gloom stuff about inflation's going to come back with tariffs. China's already said that they're going to suck up a lot of those tariffs. Home Depot, various big retailers have said they're not going to pass along these costs to people. So you're not seeing it, and you're
Yeah.
also not seeing the sort of like panic of people trying to completely stack in inventories that people had anticipated. And these numbers that had come out on inflation from like University of Michigan expectations, if you look at the graphs of Democrats polled versus Republicans, The Democrats are in like cloud cuckoo land. They think that
Yeah.
that inflation is going to be at like 6%. And if you look back historically, they're always there. They're always way off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they believe the media, they believe the narrative. It's not that they're dumb, it's just that they're naive and they listen to the media.
Yeah.
But that's just not happening. So it's going to be more. And Trump tweeted this morning that, it's time for, with this ADP number, it's time for the Fed to start cutting. So I
I
think
saw
you'll
that.
see, a lot of people think that it's July. I think the Fed probably wouldn't surprise people and do it in June. But I think once you start seeing these cuts, you have to realize that along our yield curve, there's $7 trillion in money market funds, and that's all kind of short end. When rates start coming down, there's people that need to get certain yields on bonds, and they have to start chasing. And it was probably one of the biggest tactical errors of a generation, but Janet Yellen didn't go and finance our debt with longer dated paper, and
Oh,
that
they
would have
should have
been,
been issuing
yeah,
100-year bonds at 0%.
correct.
You know?
And which they would be trading at like a penny on the dollar right now if they'd done that.
Yeah.
But the thing is because there's not much supply on the long end relative, that money is going to have to go somewhere. And my
Mm.
belief is when they start cutting rates, you're going to unleash 7 trillion, and it's going to find its way back into bonds, into longer dated paper, because people will need to take the risk that they don't currently have to, because yields are still very high and there's still a lot of real yield in the short end. And it'll also come back and find its way into equities. And there's a lot of stuff that's like, I was looking at Pepsi yesterday, and Pepsi
Mhm.
obviously has been hit because of the Maha stuff, and they produce a lot of food that's questionable in
Yeah.
terms of like what the health benefits and
Food
what it
dyes and all
does.
that
but
stuff. Yeah.
but the stock's yielding 4%. It's just gotten absolutely destroyed. So there's a lot of names like that out there that are value type names that have done really poorly. And I think once the Fed starts cutting rates, you're going to start seeing this money flow out of money markets back into the equity market. So it won't just be like the high flyers like Nvidia, AMD, all these other names, Palantir. No one knows what Palantir does, but they have 100 times sales. That's where they trade. It's a joke.
Yeah, it is a joke.
So
So I think Besant has talked about what you're talking about, right? By buying back the bonds. Isn't that
yes.
what he's been talking? I forget the name he calls it, but
Well, he's talking about a number of things. Yesterday, they made it. They allowed, I think, Wells Fargo to go out and to start adding own risk, basically, to start expanding and to to take more risk and have more
Mhm.
loans, and that was a big deal. Bessent's been talking about this supplemental leverage ratio a lot, which charges banks to own treasuries and to
Mhm.
own reserves, which is absurd that they would do that for something like treasuries. So I think they're looking at loosening that restriction, which is
Mhm.
going to be helpful to the bond market. And I'm sure at some stage, if we get to 6% on 30 years, I am absolutely sure that they're going to come in and start buying some of this stuff out, because your question was we have to refinance it. But
Mhm.
if the Fed's cutting rates, then and let's say your bonds are trading at 50 cent on the dollar,
Yeah,
you're buying it back, you only have to finance 50
half of
cents
it.
on the dollar. And then if the coupon is half, or the coupon that you were paying is half, it's the same. You're still paying the same amount of interest every year.
Yeah,
So
interesting, interesting.
so
So you're saying all these, like, pension funds and people who have to hit certain yield targets have to put the money in the market somewhere, and
well, they will if they can't get it in the short end. They
yeah,
they they absolutely will. And right now, like if you look at Bunds, Bunds, I think, are trading around 29 basis points real yield. And I think 10-year treasuries are trading, last time I looked, it's like 180 something basis points real yield. So
yeah,
the US bonds are definitely cheap. It's just no one needs to be in that long end, because obviously any kind of yield move has a much bigger price move on the longer bonds than it does in the shorter bonds. So you're
yeah,
taking a lot more risk inherently, right? So no one's going to go out and dip their toes in that until they have to. And lowering rates is a way to make people move that money. And I think because there's not very much out there relative to what there is on the short end, it could have an amplified effect. I think that's what Besson and Trump have wanted the whole time, right? And that's
interesting.
why they're playing this game with the Fed, and the Fed's not cooperating and they're making up excuses. I think probably everyone has some understanding of how this mechanism would work.
Yeah.
and no one wants Trump to succeed, right?
Interesting.
Particularly Jerome Powell.
Yeah, no kidding. And the whole matrix behind him. Tom, we're going to take a
Right.
quick break. We'll be
Yeah,
right
sure.
back. Stay with me.
Sure.